Hey everyone, this is Kate from the Your Courageous Life podcast, and this is still the Your Courageous Life podcast, but I am partnering with my friend Andy Sewell for a special 9-part series focusing exclusively on lessons from my book, The Courage Habit. Listen in as we talk about how you can apply the psychology of courage and the neuroscience of habit formation to your life to create lasting behavioral changes. If you've ever wondered how someone can learn the skill of being more courageous in their life, this special Courage Habit series that I'm embedding within the larger Your Courageous Life podcast is it. It's going to have a little Courage Habit themed intro, outro, but again, it's still the Your Courageous Life podcast, just a special little 9-part series where we do a deep dive into the courage habit and how you can apply it to your life. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Courage Habit Podcast, an exploration of the Courage Habit, the book and program designed to break the fear-based habits holding you back and replace them with the courage-based habits to enjoy the life you want. The Courage Habit was written by Kate Swoboda. She's a life coach, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and director of the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program. In this limited series podcast, I'll be asking her questions about the book and her experiences teaching her techniques.
And he's Andy Sewell, an audio producer who has started a new career after 2 decades of corporate work. Andy is an amazing storyteller, he's ferociously curious, and he's someone who has read The Courage Habit. So he was the perfect person to ask about hosting the Courage Habit podcast. You can learn more about Andy at audioephemera.com.
Each episode of the series is a continuation of our conversation. If this is your first time listening, please subscribe to the podcast so you can start from the beginning. Thank you for joining us, and let's get back into the conversation. So, Kate, you and I have similar experiences when it comes to meditation. My story is that I had been kind of flirting with the idea of a retreat, and I wanted to find something. And I came across a practice known as Vipassana, and it's 10 days of silent meditation. And I found it through a friend who had recommended it. I looked into it, found some people who had done it, and then I signed up. And it was a matter of just saying yes and traveling up to middle of nowhere, kind of Lake County, California, into the woods at this beautiful but very simplistic retreat space. And the structure was you get up very early in the morning, somewhere around 4:30, and you're basically in some form of meditation or meditative contemplation and walking and hiking until 8 p.m. at night, and then you start it again, and you do that for 10 days in total silence with no other visual or physical communication with the other 60 people that might be within 5 feet of you. And it did something interesting to me about accessing the body and kind of doing body scans and checking in with yourself. But I wanted to ask about your experience when you also did the kind of retreat-based, which I think is really common for people to go somewhere to learn how to meditate.
Yeah, my intro to meditation was a happy accident. I was just I was overloaded with work, and I really randomly was literally just picked I'll go drive Highway 1 today, and saw this little, I guess you could say, exit, little sign by the road, and followed it and ended up at Green Gulch Zen Center, which is part of the San Francisco Zen Center, and it's in Marin County. And I got out of my car, and it was like, I'm trying not to be overly dramatic here, but my honest experience was that as soon as I stepped out of the car, it was like the quiet of this it's literally a gulch between very large, I think of as mountains, but other people might call hills. In Marin County, it was just so quiet. And I started walking around on the grounds and met another, at the time I was a professor teaching at the college level. And I met another professor who was like, oh yeah, I'm just here trying to chill out and get rest. And I didn't have to do anything as structured as what you did to be there. So I came back basically on my own. And I didn't have to do anything as structured as what you did, but I had always heard about meditation, of course, have seen the articles talking about all the clinical benefits, had been curious about it, had tried meditating once in college and felt flooded with anxiety trying to do it and was like, I'm not doing that again. So it was very like, okay, I'll try it again all these years later out of college. And I don't know, something just crawled up inside of me is the way I think of it. Like maybe I was ready. I don't know. But I was able to connect with a part of me that was just not, it wasn't like checked out or numb, but just not getting hooked is the way I think of it. Just constantly getting hooked by, I got to do this. But what about this? But what if this happened? And oh God, I was such a jerk that time to that person. Oh man, I should say something to them and like just all this net in the brain. It just slowed it down. And I joke in the courage habit, like, I know. It sounds like everybody else, they go off and they start meditating. And then the next thing you know, they're writing self-help books. But it truly is, I suppose one of those cliches that has a basis in reality, which is that meditation is very potent and very effective. I started with Zen Buddhist meditation, and that's what I did for a really long time. I found that more difficult to keep up with time. And now I do guided meditations, and I pretty exclusively use the Insight Timer app. And that's what I do now. And I find that it gives me the same effect that sitting for 20 minutes in total silence used to give me. So that's one way that I access the body. There's another way that I meditate, I would say, to access the body that's more about processing out feelings. And I think the two practices really go hand in hand. And I think of them both as meditative practices, which is why I'm kind of looping in this other piece about processing out feelings. But for sure, I think meditation is a potent form of grounding for people and bringing them back to themselves and what they really want.
I think it's also you're right that there is some sort of expectation that you meditate, and after one session, you open your eyes and all of a sudden the solutions flood into you and everything seems clear and calm. That's obviously not true. Nothing really kind of comes out of that void per se. But what I feel is that energy that is more akin to no more chaos. There's no more cloudiness. There's no more, what about this? Oh, I got to get this and this. Here's the list. And there's a list within the list. You make lists of lists. It's really a big breath, and it kind of feels like that moment where you get to start. So it's almost, for me, meditation is what you do before you can start. And what was different about my experience was that silence part, because I talk for a living in some way, or I communicate with my voice for a living. To remove myself from that and to focus in on the body scan, which does bring up the emotions, which does bring up this is uncomfortable to sit here. It made me realize that the comfort in the discomfort and understanding why I was uncomfortable in those ways. Sure, there are things about my own physical health, which is why I do other activities that kind of keep me in check, that are always need attendance. It's that silent meditation, that the energy that comes out of it is a displacement. It's moving the uncomfortable into a place that I can then manage it. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that idea of just getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, whether it's physical or mental.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is a metaphor I've heard from someone else first, but I think of meditation as being, it's like you notice it more when you once you've been doing it and then aren't doing it, that's when you really see the benefits. So agreed. It's not usually like the sky opens up. You could use the metaphor of eating. It's like, if you are always eating your 3 meals a day, you don't really think too much of it. You're just eating. But man, if you go without one of them, you start to notice. And you go without lunch too? You go without breakfast and lunch and dinner? Oh, you're really going to notice the effect of not eating. So I think of meditation as being the same way. You don't notice at first the effect of not having some kind of presence-based practice. It doesn't have to be meditation, but some kind of presence-based practice that gets you back to yourself. You don't notice it if you don't do it for a little while. But man, oh man, you keep going without and you will be starving. And your whole life will show the evidence of the fact that you're starving. And if you keep going, I just don't know why I'm so angry and irritable and lethargic and I just can't figure it out. And it's like, because you're not eating, you're not literally eating. That will make you angry and lethargic and. Well, not feeding yourself on a soul and cellular level really produces the same result for most people. And so I don't think it has to be silent meditation. I think there are people who use workouts or running as meditation. There are people who use just time walking through nature as their meditation or presence-based practice. So it can look a lot of different ways, but we got to have something of it. And now I feel like I lost part of your question. Can you give me that again? Because I feel like I started talking about this metaphor of eating and I lost a bit of what else you were asking me.
I was also just thinking about food a lot too. No, I think you're on point for that. It's the being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And you brought up another point with that is the trying. And I am also, I'm in my 40s and I did not grow up in a family or in a culture where the tendency to have a physical fitness element of your day was just not ingrained in the culture I grew up in. And it is a lot more, I think, with people who are younger now, and maybe people who, because I live in Northern California, it's a little bit more dominant. People do belong to gyms by default, or they have some sort of physical routine by default. It's just part of their normal daily practice. And that's something that I had to learn was a key element to that. I didn't come from a culture where that was necessarily an obvious thing to do. In the same way that meditation has allowed me access to my mind and body in a way that maybe wasn't as accessible. But still, the trying on of the different processes is uncomfortable. It kind of comes back to that idea that you were saying before about starting and then stopping and thinking maybe this is not the right thing for me. It's difficult. You have had experience with CrossFit that I'd love to ask you about. I have had experience with CrossFit that is not the same experience you've had. And the challenges and the physicality of that don't seem to fit with me, but kind of meandering is the way I talk about it, really do speak to me. And I have learned that long distance, non-agenda based walking can really give me a lot of clarity with that, similar to the sitting. But it took me a very long time to be comfortable with those things that would normally just make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a lot of wisdom in what you shared earlier about your experience with Vipassana, in that you came to a place of recognizing that there was comfort in the discomfort. And I think that that's an experience really of there is something about not running away from yourself that is inherently comforting, if that makes any sense.
It does.
And I think that's a lot of what we're really developing the courage to do. Like, the paradox is that as soon as you stop trying to sort of outrun all of who you are or avoid all of the fear then becomes less scary. It's this place of recognizing, like, yeah, I'm not going to kick fear's ass. I'm not going to be fearless. That's not going to happen. There's this kind of like real reckoning that I think most people need to have if they start personal growth. Like, that is not going to happen. It is not. Maybe if you go dedicate your whole life to like a Vipassana practice. But if you are just going to be a lay person walking through the world, paying bills and needing to go to the dentist to get a filling and picking up kids from school and all that, it's not going to happen. Somebody's going to cut you off in traffic and scare the bejesus out of you with how they're driving. You can't bubble proof your life.
Yeah.
So we've got to start learning how to understand that when we stay with ourselves, which is essentially what a presence-based or practice or accessing the body does, that we are going to be okay. Like, it's going to be imperfect. It's going to be messy. Life won't always go how you want it to go, but you're going to be okay. And to me, there's a real translation between the day-to-day practice of that, whether it's meditation that you call it or something else, and what we're dealing with pandemics. I mean, my meditation practice has been a lifesaver during a pandemic. It's this thing that I can come to over and over and over. And I didn't talk about it in the courage habit, but I actually talked about this kind of like interesting experience I had with yoga when I was dealing with infertility before my daughter was born. I had a pretty dire infertility diagnosis. It was, serious specialists tried a bunch of the interventions, and they basically said, like, your body is not even producing follicles, much less eggs. And to give a visual, like a follicle is like the stem of a flower, and the egg would like sit on top of the flower. Like my body was not even producing the follicles. And I used to go to yoga, and then at the end of yoga, they always had shavasana. And I would lay in shavasana, and something about that laying still after all that yoga, I would get really emotional about the fact, or all that I was dealing with infertility. And so later I became pregnant, and it was an interesting thing to go to yoga when I was pregnant and lay there in shavasana. And I felt the old emotion of sadness coming up, because that somehow had been the time during which I felt safe, I guess, for the emotions to be uncorked or something like that. And it was interesting because I felt the old emotion come up and had this moment of cognitive dissonance of like, hold on a second. This thing that was making me so sad, not wanting a baby and not being able to be pregnant. Oh, turns out I am pregnant. Oh my God, there's joy. And it was this kind of recognition of the relaxing into the shavasana. So I hope that this example is making sense, but it's something about the practices that we return to again and again and again being safe spaces for us to digest our human experience, to touch down on the truth of what we feel, and then to digest the experience itself. And like, oh, okay, this is how it's changing or moving.
For me, that also relates to the distillation process. And it's been popular to kind of use that allegory, but I think it makes sense. You when you're distilling something like a liquor or a tea or a coffee, you're concentrating it, but you're doing that by having large amounts of volume and reducing it down to the volume that gets you whatever you're looking for. And when you have a starting of a practice, and I don't only mean just the starting of I'm new to meditation, but also every new meditation start, you come with the most amount of information, and then you're just sorting it. You're almost kind of aligning it. And for me, the body scan comes into that because it's this check-in. It's something I can do. I think the visual that I use from head to toe is really easy because there's an order, there's a direction, there's a limit. I can just kind of go through and check in. But what's interesting is I often find that those check-in points, whether they be physical or mental, can shift. And the ability to be sitting there and to go through the process of how is this feeling? Maybe this is related to something, and then just acknowledging it and moving on to the next section has been really helpful, because I recognize no matter how on top of it, well practiced, well fed, well exercised I might be, I always start with more chaos or more things. And the process of scanning through just allows me to kind of prioritize and then obviously attend to things that need attention, but it also alleviates just the noise that can come with so much chaos for it.
Yeah, you're talking about the body scan meditation that comes with the courage habit. And the interesting thing about how that made its way into the book. So it's for those who don't know, the courage habit comes with bonuses, and one of them is an actual audio that you can listen to do a body scan to access the body. And the way that came about was I had some early readers at my publisher who were giving me feedback, and some of them were like, well, I just don't really feel my fear. Like, I know it happens. I know fear hooks me, but I just don't even really feel it. I'm not catching the fear sensation. And it was this whole discussion. Oh, okay. Yes, there's this skill that I had overlooked, which is to even attend to and notice what your body is feeling, period. And that's how that made its way into the book, because I was just jumping straight into when you feel fear, da 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 da. And somebody had to go, hold on a minute. I've been numbing out to my fear for so long that I don't even notice when it's coming up. I've really pushed it down that far. And I need something that's a safe way to start noticing what's going on in my overall system. Because if I just go straight into noticing the fear, that's way too overwhelming. So just something that's like a body scan becomes, okay, I'm not even trying to deal with fear right now. I'm just noticing if my knee has a little tickle in it. No big deal.
It's that approach. I think it's that checking in the same way that maybe you would just say what feels off. And we all kind of notice when we wake up and maybe our shoulder's sore because we slept on it funny. But I want to get at the word fear. It's easy to think of it in terms of physical fear, where I'm afraid something's about to happen. I'm afraid in that shoulder hurt example, that it's going to make it difficult for me to type or write or whatever it's going to be. But you're also talking about fear that we make comfortable, where we say, yeah, I'm afraid to do that. I'm not going to do it. Can you talk a little bit about how that fear shows up? And it's not always the scary monster that's going to cause limiting harm to us, but it's actually also something that we accept. That fear is pretty present in our day-to-day moments.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I would probably say we can distill down to it for somebody who's like, well, I don't have fear. I don't really have issues with fear. Okay. Well, do you have issues with self-criticism or feeling like you're not enough? And I mean, rarely, but it does happen. Someone will go, no, I don't have any of those issues either, which in my head, I'm like, bullshit, but okay. You're somehow the perfect person who has totally worked out all of your stuff. You never have a moment of insecurity. You never start anything new and think, maybe I'm not up to the task. You never doubt or question or think that wasn't good enough. Oh, okay, sure. So if somebody is having trouble with, okay, I don't really get why I can't quite bring myself to iterate on the thing I want to do, or to get out into the dating world, or to have that difficult conversation. I'd say probably what's happening is like logic is overriding the fear. So we got to get under the logic and we go, okay, where's the point of self-criticism? Where's the place where you don't think that you're enough in some way? And I have met some people for whom I say the voice of self-criticism because for most people, it is very auditory in the head. But I have definitely met people for whom there really is not so much of a wordiness happening in the head as it is they have an impulse to go do something that they want to do, or to step into a new way of being, and they get like a tightness in their chest.
Yeah.
And in such cases, it's like, okay, either way, whether it's the voice that says you're stupid that causes you to start feeling fear, or you don't have the voice, you just feel the tightness in your chest, those are entry points. Where is it not feeling good? And where can you decide for yourself, I'm going to sit with this until I understand what's really going on, even if it's uncomfortable for me to sit with this, even if it takes many, many days. And I mean, there are things that patterns I have that I am untangling and that I still don't totally understand, that I work on through meditation or coaching or things like that. And I understand pieces and not all of it. The understanding is not the linchpin or the goal you're aiming for, but the sitting with to understand is part of the process of unraveling it, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that that's the hard part that I've had as transitioning to this, the inner critic, or whatever I might hear or think, that kind of secondary second guessing that happens almost right after the idea comes into my head. There's something that follows it that says, or not, or you can't, or something like that, is distinguishing the difference between that being really honest and genuine versus it's part of also the mechanism of fear, of keeping you from that. In a way, we think it's to keep us safe, but in another way, it's our own limiting language that we've developed. And I think sitting with it, being comfortable with it and going, yeah, there are some times that our mind will tell us something that is not true, is a hard one to take on. I don't know how to always give the inner critic value to say whatever they want to do, but also to compartmentalize and say, thank you, but I'm moving on with going forward with the yes rather than the no.
Yeah, it can be a tricky thing. And I would love to do the exercise from the book sometime with you. Redo, please, if you feel open to it.
Always.
Yeah. I mean, because here, I'll bring in Danielle Laporte once said to me, the truth doesn't attack. And I thought that was really profoundly put. The truth of who we are, if it's really the truth, it's not going to need to attack to make itself heard. Okay. Sometimes the truth has attack as a layer on top of it. I understand that can happen, but if we want to take away that layer to get to the truth, it doesn't attack. And then I also think of Brene Brown, guilt versus shame. And she gives examples like, if you have a night where you drink a little too much, guilt says that was not a good choice. And notice that that's not an attack. That was not a good choice. That's the truth. Shame says, you're such an idiot. How could you have done that? And like goes into that whole spiral. That's attack. So I listen for, is the voice giving helpful feedback, or is the voice attacking? Is the voice undermining, or is it interested in helping my most courageous self to come forward? And I know today we were going to talk a lot about accessing the body, but I'm happy to jump into Redo Please with you as an exercise if there's an inclination to go this way, or you can edit this out and we'll do that later if that's
no.
You're
I think that let's go for that, because I think that from my experience has been, yes, there are some times where we physically get a no, or I'm trying to do something and I simply can't lift it, can't move it, or can't accomplish whatever I'm trying to do physically. To be honest, I often found that a lot with like CrossFit or more gym focused activities. But I also know that comes from the mental. And so I would love to jump into that if that's something you want to just go ahead and try right now.
Yeah, sure. So for an exercise like Redo Please, I would say, let's get into something like an idea that you've had that maybe you haven't felt like you were quite, the voice of the critic is saying things like, you're not enough, or who do you think you are that you would even attempt this, things like that. And the reason I'd say that is just because at the end of the day, with a voice like, your experience with CrossFit, which I'm a total CrossFit addict. I love it and all that, but I do totally recognize that for other people, it's like, ew, why would you do that to yourself? So I am not going to push you to try to redo please yourself into doing CrossFit. Though if you did decide you liked it, I'd be tickled and I'd be texting you going, so what'd you do? Da, da, da. Right. But, so like, what is something that you would say is first and foremost in your mind? I often find that topics like money or a big project and worrying about how other people might critique it can be hotbed topics for Redo Please.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a nuanced thing is the ability to trust my own experience and authority and feel like what I'm conveying across to my clients or anybody I'm interacting with is that I do have the prowess. And the reason why I say that is I work in audio engineering in an industry where there isn't really a certification or something, and where you can evaluate this is how long or how valuable my skill set is. But I come from a world where I spent better part of 2 decades where everybody has a number of degrees and a number of certifications. And that's how you evaluate the value of somebody, is what they can offer you based off of their LinkedIn profile, what skills they have been reinforced or celebrated. And I'm now working in a world where there isn't that structure. So it's the confidence in saying, I know what I'm talking about, is something that I have a hard time communicating and will often just kind of teeter off after a while and start to believe that I don't have the expertise.
Okay. So if someone was doing this exercise on their own at home with the book, what I would say is it's a piece of paper and you write down the thing that I'm afraid that ... or the question at hand. And I hear the question that you are asking being something like, am I good enough to do this? Good enough as in success to be successful at this.
Yeah.
Do I have what it takes to be successful at this? And if you were at home doing this, those of you listening with a book, it's a piece of paper and the structure works just like this. You give voice to the critic, and the critic gets to say whatever it wants to say. And if what the critic says is not respectful, you say to the critic, redo, please. I'm open to hearing what it is you have to say, but it has to be respectful. With me doing this with you live here, this will be a role play. So you are going to speak to me as your critic, meaning don't talk about the situation like from an analysis place, but actually give me what your critic would say to you in your head. So instead of my critic would normally say, gosh, what do you think you're doing? What you, Andy, would say to me would be, okay, gosh, what do you think you're doing? And then I am going to be in the role of redo, please. And we'll do this for a little bit and then pause at a certain point and do a debrief. Sound good?
Sounds perfect. I'm ready to go.
All right. So, and I'm going to be talking to you as critic. So I'm just going to say, so critic, what is it that you'd like me to know?
I don't know if you have enough experience to tout the value you're really offering.
Okay. So critic, I hear what you had to say. I don't know if you have enough experience. I noticed that the tone of voice sounds a little undermining, and I'd like to ask for you to rephrase that, please. I'm totally open to hearing what you have to say, but it has to be phrased respectfully. Redo, please.
I'm wondering if the amount of experience that you have had is the right amount of experience before you offer this out to other people to help them with their ideas.
Okay. So you're wondering if the amount of experience is the right amount of experience. And I hear you say you're wondering it. Critic, what is the truth that you feel about Andy's experience? Does Andy have the right experience, critic?
When you look at other people doing the same thing, they seem to have more experience. They've done it for more years. They've had recognition. They've definitely been awarded or called out or otherwise signaled as an expert, and you don't have any of those backgrounds or accolades or acknowledgement.
Okay. So critic, when you say that Andy doesn't have those accolades or accomplishments, is that a criticism or is that just a statement?
It's a statement. It's observing it. But I think that the assumption is you have to have those accolades before you can offer that out as value to other people.
Okay. So redo, please, critic. You are telling Andy that he can't do something based on his experience and making that a barrier to what he's trying to do. I need you to rephrase that. And I need you to rephrase it from a place of support for what Andy is trying to do.
This is difficult to change the language, but I wonder if your experience is equal to what you're offering out to people. Is it fair that you are trying to provide a service and provide a skill set out into the world without having been tested against some sort of external monitoring? Actually, I want to restart with that. I want you to reiterate what critic's job at this point in terms of the redo, because I think that I'm missing this part.
I was just about to pause. So what I notice is, or here's what I'm curious about, and please keep this in the recording because I think this will be really helpful for people to hear. What I'm hearing when we do this role play, so we're pausing the role play officially to talk about it for a second. I hear you being really polite. I'm wondering if your critic is actually that polite to you in your head.
Not at all. No.
Your critic is saying things like, I wonder if your experience is equal to, like, that's so, generous. Like that's how you might talk to me if you were concerned that I was getting in over my head with some experience. But most people, the critic in the head is like, are you fucking kidding me? You don't have experience. What are you talking? So as we go back into this exercise, really talk as your actual critic sounds. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. My feelings can't be hurt. It's a role play.
Okay.
All right. So let's begin again. So critic, what is it you want me to know about how Andy is royally screwing all this up?
You simply can't put out in the world your sign for work. Like, you can't ask people to hire you if you don't have the same recognition that other big, maybe icons in the industry have. You're just small peanuts, and you're asking to be treated as if you're a 100-year expert on this, and you're simply not.
And so what is it you want Andy to do differently, critic?
Well, I think that if you had the experience, had the accolades, maybe could show off some of your work and get enough clients to see the value in that, maybe that'll work. But in this time, you just have to rinse and repeat until you get the attention.
Okay, so critic, you feel that Andy needs to get more experience in order to get the kind of recognition that he will need to succeed at this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's not only is it experience, but it's also the recognition part of it. So doing it well and being able to repeat that consistently and at a high enough level that equals the value you're asking for.
Okay, so critic, what do you need to tell Andy to support him in doing that? Redo, please. Because so far, what you've been sharing with him is not supporting him in getting the experience that you feel he needs.
I think that one experience is to take each interaction with a client or a project and maybe chart that against what was learned, what skills were either refined or perfected or new, what skills fell a little short and need some attention, and what skills are simply not there and can either be found somewhere else or more focus in developing them so that they are not a hindrance in the next project that comes up.
That's really, really helpful. But I'm really interested, critic, in what you can say that's supportive of what Andy's trying to do.
I think that so far, the experience that you have had has been very good. It's always been skill building. It's always been informative and curious. And that skill of being curious, trying to find new ways to do things or think about how things were done and review how they were done and reiterate that for the next one, always trying to make things better is great. And if you're always trying to make things better, you're always on a forward trajectory. You're always moving towards your ultimate goal. And that's a positive. You're distancing yourself from the point zero.
Great. What else? How can you be even more enthusiastically supportive, critic, of what it is Andy's doing? How can you let Andy know, critic, that you have his back?
I think that you will be successful I think that you will be successful as you get more and more projects. Each project is a step towards the ultimate goal. And even if the ultimate goal is just continuing to become better and better, very soon you will find yourself already at the level of operating of value and quality and not needing to get external accolades or some sort of stellar golden resume that gets people's attention on its own. Your work will be what attracts you to new clients.
Critic, how can you support Andy right now in not needing external accolades, including you, the critic, giving those accolades?
I think maybe getting out of the way and not reminding Andy that he has fewer than hundreds of years of experience and not pointing out where there are shortnesses of skill sets, but maybe just recognizing how something has improved or become more mastered with the most recent project. So being present in the project and saying, this is great, and it's leading us towards the bigger goal.
Okay, critic. So I have a very important question for you. And critic, I know that you would not BS anyone because critics tell what they see as the truth. So critic, what are you most afraid of?
I'm afraid of just watching him fail publicly in a way that is disgraceful and having to go back to zero. That just seems like a big risk. There's a lot of shame and awareness if something doesn't succeed, and I'd like to protect him from having to go through that experience.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Courage Habit podcast, and thanks to Kate Swoboda for joining me. You can find her book, The Courage Habit, wherever you buy your books. Please shop local when you can. You can also find out information about her, the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program, and other resources at yourcourageouslife.com.
And you can find out more about Andy and his work at audioephemera.com. That's audio ephemera, EPHEMERA.com.
Subscribe to this podcast to get all the episodes, and share it with a friend. Also, please rate the show and leave a review as it helps others discover the podcast. Join us next episode as we continue our conversation about building a courageous life.